Hey, everybody, it's Don Davis, one of your co hosts from your favorite podcast, Supply Chain Secrets. We're recording this on November 30th, so Bryan and I are still processing and recovering from a food coma, better known as Thanksgiving. But on this episode, we had Jon Gold from the National Retail Federation. And a great guest, really interesting guy. He shared a lot about his background, and we started to get into his learnings over the past 2 years because he's been at this for 14. And I think we can all agree that the past 2 years have been a bit unique in terms of how the things have changed. So it's great to get his perspective. We did ask him some questions about retail demand. I think there's been a lot of different data points. And so we asked Jon to help set it straight. Like, what is he seeing? Is there going to be a return to normal? So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then we started to talk about some of the issues in supply chain and what kinds of things has he seen that has worked? Does he have any thoughts or ideas of how retailers or shippers should approach it? And then we started to get into the Jobs Act and get his thoughts. And we actually gave Jon access to the $1.2 trillion. So it was well spent, I assure you. And then we started to talk a little bit more about retailers, their mindset. Are they looking more short term and long term? And then finally, we talked a little bit about their events for 2022. And then the best part of the show, where our guest gets to play podcaster, you got to ask us some questions, which I thought was pretty cool. So that's the show. I think you guys will really like it. It was a great show for us. And don't forget, give us feedback, rate us, review us, because we like to hear from our listeners, and you help us create the content for the show. So continue to do that, and we appreciate it. So hope you like the show.
You are now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast with Bryan Most and Don Davis.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Most, SVP of Retail Strategy at NYSHIX and former VP of Supply Chain at Walmart.
And I'm Don Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Carrier Strategy here at NYSHIX and former executive of CMA CGM and Hapag-Lloyd.
And we're back again with our podcast, Supply Chain Secrets. I hope everyone enjoyed Thanksgiving and hopefully got a bit of relaxing time with friends and family. Hey, Don, how was your Thanksgiving?
Great. Any chance to hang out with family, eat, drink, be merry, watch some football? Pretty awesome. How about yourself?
Yeah, kind of the same. Good times. Never long enough, but to take a quick break, it was really, really nice. And hey, look. Since we just finished Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we thought it'd be great to have a guest on that could maybe help us break all this down, give us some insights maybe for the rest of the holiday season. So I am super excited to introduce Mr. Jon Gold. He is the Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. In this role, Jon is primarily the spokesperson and responsible for representing the retail industry before Congress and the administration on supply chain, international trade, product safety, and customs-related issues impacting the retail industry. While at the NRF, he has been a leading advocate of the value of trade and global value chains to the U.S. economy. Jon also currently serves on the Department of Commerce's Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness. Jon, thanks for coming on the show, and how was your Thanksgiving?
Hey, Bryan, good to see you. Good to see you, Don. Thanksgiving was good. Was able to get out of town for a little bit and see family, and always good to have the little ones see their family outside of DC. So it was a good time.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into breaking down kind of what you thought about Thanksgiving and what the rest of the holiday season is going to bring. But I think it'd be great for those that don't know you in the industry. I know many do, but those that don't, just to get a bit more of your background in shipping and kind of what drew you into global trade and supporting this kind of business.
Sure. So I went to college here in Washington, D.C. and studied international business. And to be honest, had no desire to get into the politics whatsoever. Just, international business was always interesting to me, and had the opportunity back in, I think it was 1993, the summer of 93, to intern for an electronics trade association at that point in time in their government affairs department doing trade policy work. And I just caught the bug then. It was the summer of NAFTA and U.S.-Japan trade relations, China relations, and just caught the bug then and graduated a couple years later and got my foot in the door with another retail trade group and started on the kind of the ground level and, told my boss, hey, I want to do lobbying. And 6 months later, she kind of threw me out the door and was lobbying on China PNTR issues. And then from there, things took off. And then, I'd always had an interest in transportation as well. I think trade and transportation go hand in hand, especially as you're looking at the retail supply chain. And then really kind of post 9/11 was really kind of when it all kind of clicked and came together. and all the work that we were doing on supply chain security, port security related issues, and being kind of put at the forefront of leading coalitions on that effort, working on major legislation on port security. After then, 10-year stint with the other group, went to Customs and Border Protection for about a year and a half, working on implementation of the Safe Port Act, working on CTPAT, ISF, some trade related issues, and then NRF came calling, and been with NRF since mid 2007. So going on 14 plus years working on these issues, and just I've always had a strong interest in it, and it just fascinates me working on these issues every day. And it seems like there's always something going on, but yet the industry really is one that continues to transform, which is exciting to me to see how they deal with the challenges they face on a daily basis and really kind of reinvent themselves to make sure they're staying at the forefront. Just to see the industry grow over the past 20 years and how much it's changed has just been really significant, and love working with that. Love the people that I've been working with as well. I mean, Bryan, you and I worked together while I was, in different roles, and always appreciated your guidance and support on those issues that we were working on.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's really been kind of a fun journey, and you've obviously talked about a lot of things that have changed in the industry and that have come and gone and made the industry better. And I wonder how the last year or two stacks up. The headlines, to see global supply chain in the headlines, major news publications on the nightly news, it certainly has made its mark, I think, on the general public. But what kind of sticks out to you, and maybe what are some things that we could learn that we carry forward?
Yeah, everybody's writing a supply chain story these days. The number of press calls we're getting about the impact on the supply chain has been unreal. And we've dealt with disruption issues in the past. When you look at labor negotiations that have gone south and led to long disruptions and other issues. But this has certainly been the most sustained disruption that I've seen in the 20 plus years I've been working on this. And I think the fact that supply chain certainly has been at the C-suite level throughout the pandemic. It started early on with the shortage on key supplies, toilet paper, paper towels, and things like that, medical goods, and it just continued throughout. I think the key here for retailers is trying to adapt and really kind of look at your supply chain holistically and figure out how do you get beyond kind of the just in time, just in case, but really build that resilient supply chain going forwards. Because I think we all recognize that this isn't going to be the last disruption we see in supply chains. Hopefully, the last to this degree, but retailers have always had contingency plans in place, obviously looking, on weather related issues, labor strife. Even terrorist related issues were built in post 9/11. But I don't think anybody looked at the pandemic to the degree that we're witnessing today. Obviously, with the avian flu, that was baked in to a degree, but nothing to the degree of what we're seeing today. And just it continues, and just the ongoing uncertainty of not knowing when we're going to get back to the quote unquote normal. I don't think that there's going to be a back to normal. I think it's going to be a new normal going forwards that everybody's going to have to adopt to. And I think this is really where, the retailers are trying to find those key strategic partners that are able to work with them and adapt and be nimble and address the issues at hand that day going forwards.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think your background and your perspective. Having done this for 14 years, a lot's changed. And by the way, before I forget, I have to say it's always great to talk to a fellow international business major, because I too majored in international business, so that's pretty cool. But when you think about like what's been happening, I think there's a lot of discussion, a lot of data points on what's really happening in the retail sector. Is it increasing? We noticed that through COVID that there was a shift from services to goods, and there's been all this emphasis on goods, which has led to all this excess demand. And how do you see that? Because I keep seeing like different data points, and it's like, oh, it's slowing down, and there's conflicting stories in the media. And I wonder if just from your perspective, you could shed some light on how you see it.
Yeah, I think we have seen the consumer demand has just been off the charts throughout the pandemic. I think, as you noted, when we had the shutdown orders here and folks weren't able to go out and travel, entertainment, sports, movies, what have you. They turn their attention to buying goods, and looking around the house and seeing, hey, we haven't updated our kitchen in a long time. Let's update the kitchen. Let's buy a new washing machine. And then trying to keep the kids busy and buying all the products you need to keep young and older kids busy. And just that has just continued. And we've seen that consumer demand And part of that too is when you're, paying people to stay home and they have extra discretionary money that they're not spending on the services you talked about, that is continued. And I think we've seen that looking at what our holiday forecast is. I mean, looking at an increase of 8.5 to 10.5% over last year, which was record spending. So that just continues. And obviously for retailers trying to meet that demand has been a challenge. The demand has just outpaced the available supply of not just the products, but the raw materials and inputs needed to make those goods, both overseas as well as here at home. And then just everything you need to move that good from overseas through the supply chain, there has been a shortage. Whether it's workers, empty containers, space on vessels, chassis. I mean, everything, it's every step along the way in the supply chain, there's been some kind of challenge. And I think, back to one of the questions that we keep getting is, how does this get fixed? And to be honest, there's no silver bullet. And I think you guys know that, better than anybody. We've got to figure out at each step of the way, how do we work collaboratively together to figure out a path forwards and really build out a future supply chain, because the supply chain that's been built to date can't handle the volumes that we're seeing on imports and exports. We've got to be better and smarter about how we're working through the supply chain. The lack of investment certainly has hampered the ability to do that, but we can't physically build our way out of this. We've got to be smarter about how we're using our assets. We've got to have better IT in place, better automation in place, better connectivity among all supply chain stakeholders so that there's communication and we know at every step of the way what's needed to move product.
Yeah, that's interesting, your perspective. And I think those things about, connectivity, data, there's been a lot of things changing. And I think you're starting to see this industry accelerate in terms of the digitization of the industry. And I think, if you look at the past 14 years, I mean, certainly the past like 3 to 5 years, you've seen an acceleration there. Is there anything that's top of mind for you that you think is driving improvements or is helping solve some of these issues that are currently going on in supply chain?
I think the collaboration is critical to that. I think getting beyond the pointing fingers and getting everybody to the table and really talk through what the real issues are is critical. And I think being able to share more data and intelligence is critical to that, because if you can't measure and have the data behind it, you can't really resolve the issue. I mean, this is why, several years ago we were pushing for port metrics to really understand what's happening. I mean, the last big infrastructure bill that passed, we had a port metrics provision in here, and we always talk about the issues at the gates. The fact that you don't have a common definition of what a turn time is it when the truck gets in the gate or when the truck gets in the queue for the gate? How are you measuring it? You can't really determine where the challenges are. And to be honest, many of the challenges that we're facing today existed prior to COVID. They've just been further exacerbated today. And I think this really is the time when we've really got to get together and really resolve these issues, because we can't just go back to the way it was prior to COVID. We've got to have a better system in place, which needs to happen. I think, again, putting the supply chain issues at the C-suite level, there certainly is a lot of pressure on the chief supply chain officers to get it right, quote unquote, fix it. And again, part of that is really evaluating your entire supply chain from end to end, and that's looking at where you're sourcing from, making sure you've got the right sourcing partners, whether it's here or abroad. And there's the question of, well, why can't we just bring everything back here? I mean, that's great in theory, but it's not practical. You can't do that. We don't have the workforce here to make everything here. And oh, by the way, if we have another shutdown, that causes even more problems if you can't get anything from anywhere else. So I think some folks are looking at nearshoring or onshoring, but that takes time. And how do we fix things here and now? Again, we've got to talk through and really address these issues and work together. I think it is going to continue to be a challenge, but I think, industry will certainly find the way out of it. I think early on in the pandemic, retailers, many invested a lot in technology to help address the ongoing challenges. We kind of joke early on, we saw, 3 to 5 years worth of investment in the first 5 months of the pandemic, just with everything that went to buy online, pick up in store, and things like that retailers hadn't really considered in the immediate. But when the stores were forced to shut down because they were determined, or they were deemed as non-essential, they had to find a way to move their product. So that's why you saw the spike in online sales early on in the pandemic, and the shift to things like, again, curbside pickup and buy online, pick up in store, which really took off and continued today.
John, that's where I wanted to pick up. You talked about some of these trends and some of the ways retailers have adapted to serve customers. But what's been at the heart of this thing has been really a demand boom, right, for North America. And you and NRF do a great job of communicating kind of the mindset of the consumer. What the kind of forward looking projections are for retail sales, inventory levels, things of that nature. And from what I've seen lately, you continue to be optimistic, and you're talking about continued strength in the economy. But I'd love for you to share a bit more about that, because I think a lot of people in the industry are questioning, like, how long does this demand continue before we do settle back into whatever a normal is? And there's a lot of questions around that right now.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I think it's the ongoing question of, again, when do we get back to that normal? And until that consumer demand cools off, it's unclear when we're going to get back there. And I think right now, we're looking at the holidays. We haven't done our 2022 forecast yet. Won't do that till February. But I think most of the execs that we talk to are all looking at this demand to continue, at least through the first half of 2022. And I think that's, you talk to most of the logistics experts, they agree that these disruptions and challenges are going to continue at least until that point, if not longer. But again, with all the ongoing uncertainty over the pandemic, I mean, the new variant, we don't know what the impact that's going to have on the supply chain. It's a lot of uncertainty, but I think there's still a belief in the consumer and that ongoing strong demand. But I think as we see more travel pick up, more entertainment and other services start to pick up again, you might see some of that cooling off on the retail goods. But I think we still look at a strong consumer demand going forwards.
Yeah, that goods versus services trade-off is one that many have talked about. And when that intersection happens or kind of, balances back out, is as you said, is still a question. Certainly more people have traveled this holiday than they did previous because of, the vaccines and people feeling more comfortable, etc. But this idea as well as, even if demand stays strong through the first half of next year, there's still this discussion of kind of inventory levels and needing to
hmm
also restock to a certain degree. And then any inflationary pressures that might persist. Do either of those factors play in for you?
They definitely do. I think just back to your point on the travel, the fact that now international travel has opened back up again. I mean, that's a big part of retail sales as well, is that international traveler coming to the States and buying goods. So that's an additional demand that I think retailers need to plan for as well. But I think to your point, the ongoing inflationary concerns certainly is a concern for consumers as well as for retailers. I mean, the increased costs that retailers have faced because of these supply chain disruptions, not just on the cost of the product itself, but the transportation costs, which have gone through the roof. And the decision by the retailer to pass along some or all of that cost is a challenge. I mean, I think many of the larger retailers certainly can absorb most of that costs, but the smaller, medium-sized guys really don't have much of a choice and have to pass that cost along to the consumer. But the consumer continues to be willing to spend. I think again, looking at just the holiday sales and what we're expecting, consumers are going to be spending more this year than they have in the past. And whether that's they're buying more or just it costs more, I think is a question.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and that's a great perspective. I want to change gears a bit, and I want to talk a little bit about this $1.2 trillion Investment and Jobs Act. And I think the NRF has been a vocal supporter. And why can you talk a little bit about why you think it's so important? And is there anything you think that should focus on in terms of the 1.2 trillion that's available?
Sure. I mean, obviously, we have underinvested in our infrastructure for decades. So the opportunity to put more money towards hard infrastructure, ports, roads, bridges, we think is critically important. Obviously, there's a big call out for, I think it was $17 billion for port infrastructure. I mean, look, we know that's not nearly enough for what we need, but it's a good start. And I think putting that together is critically important. I think the call out for a focus on getting more drivers into the workforce is critically important. The younger driver pilot program, which they have for interstate trucking, we think is important to help address some of those challenges. But again, looking at the holistic approach on supply chain and freight movement, which hasn't really been done in the past, we think is really important. So that's why we're pleased to see this go forward. There are other elements in here. EV charging stations is a big part of this as well. Looking at the evolution of that is, for many retailers, looking at that is important. So we think it's a great opportunity, and we think hopefully this will help address some of the challenges we faced within infrastructure. But certainly we know more needs to be done on investment. And again, we can't just build our way out of this because we know it's going to take time, but we've got to focus on some of the IT related issues as well. And how do we look at creating a port portal or something along those lines, like what they have in Port of LA, to communicate information out to stakeholders about the state of the supply chain and where things are. I think that's incredibly important. I think that's where some of that money's going to go as well.
So do you think that there's like going to be a short-term, medium-term, long-term impact? I mean, how do you see the impact of, I mean, 1.2 trillion sounds like a lot of money. Sounds like also there's areas that are underfunded in this.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm just, just guy on the street and trying to think about this, I mean, do you have any perspective on like, if this money gets appropriated in this way, is there some degree of expectation I should have as far as when I'm going to start to see things change?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it's more of a medium to long term because we know it takes a while to get projects up and running, get the approval processes in place. But again, just even having that money out there and having the excitement about it and having the projects start moving forward is critically important. And I think the other part of the bill too was cutting down some of the time it takes to get the projects moving, which is important as well. Because more times than not, when you have to go through the approval process and the permitting processes, by the time you're ready to put the shovel in the ground, it's already outdated and costs more money to do the project as a whole. So, I think we're looking more medium to long term, but again, the excitement about having that and the anticipation is important.
And if you had control of that and you were thinking of this is going to be the quickest win, this is going to be the most immediate impact, do you have a sense of like it would be X?
I mean, I think I would put more money towards first mile and last mile connectors. I think that really is where we are sorely lacking, and we need to see more of that investment going forwards, especially as you're looking at the growth of e-commerce and things like that, especially on last mile. We've got to have better connectivity going forwards.
John, one of the things you touched on earlier was, some of the things that your members are having to do to manage through, these difficult, disruptive times. You mentioned that these are now C-suite type of issues. You now see supply chain being reported in earnings, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a really broad listener group, which is great because we get a ton of feedback from shippers, carriers, NVOs, education types of folks that listen in supply chain. But when you think about your members and you hear, what they actually need from supply chain partners, is there anything, if you are a supply chain partner or you're a service provider, are there things that they should be thinking about how they could better serve your retail members or how they could become, one of these providers of choice in the future?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, communication is critical, and being able to understand what the plan is going forwards. I think that's one of the lessons learned, at least for members I've talked to, is it's not just the internal communication, making sure that everybody who's involved in supply chain understands what the plan is going forwards, but making sure you have partners in place who can react to that and who can implement those changes as needed. But also having partners who are creative as well and coming to you with solutions and looking for opportunities to kind of prove themselves as being able to be nimble and react to these challenges. I think that's what a lot of retailers are looking for, is for those creative solutions to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And the great thing is Don and I have talked on previous podcasts is I think one of the results of this challenging time is it certainly has brought forward the need for that collaboration that you talked
Mm-hmm.
about. These deeper relationships, the ability to kind of trust and share data and think more long term. This idea of saying we do need to build some resilience, some diversification. We do need to be a bit more thoughtful about our relationship going forward, and not just for the next 12 months, but for the next several years, so to speak. And I just wonder, do you see your members thinking more long term with their supply chain needs?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. I think you want to have folks in place, partners in place for long term, because that's when you build the trust going forwards. So I think that certainly has been a focus on trying to find those partners that are going to be with you for the long term, and that is critically important. And I think that's where there's been a lot of focus. And again, trying to find the right partners who can implement what your needs are in a timely manner is kind of where folks stand right now.
Yeah, I think if I just recap for a second, I mean, it's quite a picture, right? It sounds like retail sales are going to be strong. It sounds like disruptions are going to be part of our lives. We just don't know when they're going to happen. And, that it seems like things are going to be dare use the word turmoil. I don't know that there's, I don't know if that's the right word. It might be too strong, but I think there's quite a bit going on as far as like disruptions to the industry. And I think, long term makes a lot more sense for me because coming from the carrier side, I have a carrier background, that it felt like a lot of relationships were transactional, that
Mm-hmm.
they were more about the cost versus service delivery. And to be fair, I think carriers at different times tried different types of like priority services and things like that, and they weren't really adopted, or people didn't always want to pay for it. So it was very difficult and it was costly for the carriers to operate. So I think shifting from more of a shorter term focus, as you say, to start to think more long term, I think from a ocean carrier perspective, I think most carriers would welcome that. Do you see that as well from a carrier standpoint?
I think so. I mean, I think again, getting beyond that, as you know, the transactional mindset here is critically important. And I think, from what I've heard from many of my members over the years, they've been looking for that better service as part of that contract. And I think, that is certainly going to be coming to play as folks are now doing contracting earlier than they normally would, looking at potentially longer term contracts. That is incredibly important. I agree 100%. And I think, we've got to get beyond kind of the transactional nature of this and really look at the relationship and building long term. And only through that avenue are we going to have the ability to really be resilient and build those long term strategies to address any challenges that we see in the future.
Yeah, and I think that, while the price increases are kind of all over the place, right? Like you've seen rates from anywhere from 6,000 to, 25,000. So that's
Hmm.
just quite a bandwidth. But I think as things start to normalize, it's going to give carriers an opportunity to say, okay, we can actually build and create a product that has improved service delivery and customers would be willing to pay for it. And then you're going to have your standard service over here. But now that rates are really compensatory for the carriers, which for a long time, carriers were really had a cost focus. That was always the driver. And now that there's actually some money behind it, my prediction, if you will, is that you'll start to see in the next few years that carriers are going to build out more services that are priced accordingly, but it's going to be more focused on service delivery, and then retails will be able to consume that. But I just want to shift gears for a second. So there's an event coming up, the NRF Big Show, and that's coming up in January in New York. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about what's on the agenda, what's top of mind, and what are your expectations with that event?
Yeah, so this will be the first live big show in almost 2 years. Thankfully we were able to have the event back in 2020, right before COVID hit. Last year we had, or this year we had it a virtual, but this will be back in person at the Javits Center in January. This is our big event. I think we're expecting hopefully 20-25,000 folks attending at
Wow.
Javits. Prior to COVID, we would have said, would have been, probably double that. But I think we're expecting, a very good turnout for this event. And I think folks are excited to see kind of the future of the industry. We are running a full supply chain track at the big show this year, which we hadn't done previously. And it's trying to address all the different challenges that we're seeing, that retailers are seeing within the industry, everything from sustainability to supply chain management. So it's we're excited about it and looking forward to seeing everybody live and in person in January.
Yeah, I
And
think
it's so important. I was just going to say, John, it's so important to bring, right, stakeholders together. You talked about so many times there's finger pointing, that happens, and
Hmm.
the idea of bringing stakeholders together to kind of share information and work towards a common solution is just badly needed in this industry. And then you and I had talked. You're actually going to go one step further. The supply chain track is great at the big show, but you're even thinking about doing a specific supply chain event for your retailers as well. Is that right?
Yeah, no, we're excited. We're launching a brand new supply chain event, Supply Chain 360, next June. It will be the inaugural event in Cleveland in late June. And we're excited. It's going to be a day and a half event. And again, looking at some of the key supply chain issues that members are facing, with a focus on not just supply chain but sustainability and how the two are really intertwined. Looking at tracks on operations, technology, sustainability, and how we address this going forward. So we're excited. We've got Hal Lawton, the CEO of Tractor Supply, will be doing the initial keynote. Lorianne Rocco from CNBC with a fireside chat. So we're excited about seeing that and everything that we're going to have to offer there.
yeah, that's cool, and I think it's exciting for a lot of people to get back in person and to really collaborate because it's really you can accelerate the communication when you're there in person. So that's really cool. I think we're at a point in the show, Jon, where we like to turn things around and give our our guests a chance to ask Bryan and I questions. I think our listeners have really enjoyed that. And certainly I know our guests have, because it's fun to be a podcaster. Bryan and I can attest. So is there anything that's top of mind that you'd like to ask either Bryan or myself?
Yeah, so I think, look, you guys have, great experience with your respective, previous employers, looking at all the challenges we're facing in the supply chain. And, I hate to say with, all the finger pointing right now, but where do you guys see things going in the future with the kind of retail carrier terminal relations and the challenges that we're facing today? Obviously, what you guys are doing in NICEX is great in trying to bring the industry forwards and looking at new and creative solutions. So how do you see that kind of all interplaying, and how, looking at the challenges faced over the past year and a half, how has that worked for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that question first. So for us, it's been really a remarkable journey. I think being part of NICEX, I think solving a problem that has been plaguing the industry for a long time, which is just this vicious cycle of how contracting was done. It is just something people have accepted for different reasons. It was hard to change, and now with the current environment, it's been fun to try and help people figure out how to innovate and be different when it comes to contracting. I mean, you talked a lot about how, a lot of these changes are here to stay, and you can't
Mhm.
take the same approach. And I think that has really helped us. People are trying to do things differently, but to have a product that works, and it not just for on the shipper side, but the carriers too can see the value of saying like, hey, this is great, because there's been this behavior of, if I want to get to 10,000 TEUs, do I ask for 15,000 because I think I'm going to land at 10? Like, and this just creates all these types of issues. So to be part of a solution has been really cool. And I think, I mean, from at least my perspective, is we expect to continue to help the industry innovate and think differently. And it's been really cool to do that.
Yeah, I think Don's exactly right. And the thing I would tell you, Jon, is for someone who now kind of sits in the middle, kind of this neutral third party between shippers and carriers, and being able to hear both sides in terms of what they want, what they need, what they desire. It's amazing. They all want the same thing, right?
Yep.
They all want predictability. They all want to be efficient. They all want to be good partners to each other. A lot of times, though, it gets lost in translation between the two in terms of communicating those needs, or documenting what those needs and expectations are, or somehow standardizing, some of it. So, there is consistency between it. But the hope I have is that everybody does ultimately, from what I can see, want the same thing. And to be able to do it through technology and process and standardization, I think is the way forward. You talked about that. And, I think to be part of that movement, and having, I think, probably this inflection point that we all recognize, it's time to move forward and collaboratively get together and find a way to solve this. Because while the infrastructure investment is great and the working, committees are great, ultimately it's going to take, shippers and carriers and their supply chain partners, to your point, truly working together to solve it. And I'm starting to see that, which is exciting. And to know that technology and the investment in technology is going to be the heart of it, I think that's what's going to help us sustain.
So any other questions you want to ask Bryan or myself?
When do you guys think we're at the end of this? We're back to normal as you guys are working with your clients. What are they telling you for the, looking for the next year or so? What are they planning for?
Well, I mean, I think from a carrier perspective, I think the word normal is a little dangerous, because I think that has different expectations for people. I mean, I
Yep.
think the carriers don't want it to be a cost-driven business anymore. I mean, let's face it. I mean, the numbers are really significant on earnings, and I think it's not necessarily realistic to say I'm going to earn 12 to 16 billion dollars in a year. But I think there's some thought around, I want to make a decent return on my investment, so I can do that. Now, there's just a lot of concerns from a carrier perspective, because demand continues to be strong. There are vessels which are being built, which expect to be deployed sometime in 2023. Is that going to solve all the issues? Not sure. There's IMO regulations coming up. There's these labor risks coming up for both coasts in the next 2 years. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty around that. But my sense is carriers really want to try and do a better job, that they're not happy that the results are great and their service levels haven't been poorer than now. I mean, that from an optics perspective isn't great. They would like to fix it. If they could just snap their fingers and fix it, I'm sure they would, because it's not fun for them either to be parked outside a port for, weeks on end. So I would say it looks like it's going to be here for a while. And I would say at least 2 to 3 years, just given all the uncertainty that's out there.
And John, I'll tell you, there aren't many shippers I talk to that are optimistic that this is resolved or a new normal is established within the next 12 months. I think you can see the actions from shippers that essentially kind of back that up. You wouldn't see shippers out there, chartering ships. You wouldn't see shippers negotiating contracts this fall for next spring already. I think just this general understanding that the current backlogs and port disruption is probably, as Don said, going to be here for some time, unless somehow velocity can pick up significantly, because the demand will probably continue to be there. And then this recent bit of news, I think, on top of that, made shippers really uncomfortable when I think the main labor agreement on the West Coast that was proposed to maybe extend that, and that extension was declined. And so this idea now of thinking I have to be proactive in terms of de-risking or managing my supply chain around things that at least I know could be a potential, issue, and I've got to protect against it. So I think you already have people recognizing that disruption is probably at least with us through 2022, and then we'll see beyond that.
Yeah, I think to that point, many retailers are already planning on that, knowing the history we've seen with some of these labor negotiations, and it certainly has added some concern and the need to move quickly. With looking at next year. So we certainly hope the sides will start negotiating early and we'll be able to get a deal done. But if past is prologue, we know that's just not going to happen, unfortunately. But I don't think right now, with all the challenges we're facing right now, this is something else we want to add to that. But it's something that we know we have to deal with, and hopefully the parties will stay at the table, negotiate, get a deal, and we won't see disruption from either side as a result.
Totally agree.
Yeah, that'd be ideal. All right, last chance, John. Any other questions you want to ask us?
Who's winning the Super Bowl?
I'm going. People aren't going to like this, but I think New England has been playing pretty strong. So I don't know, maybe because they won 6 in a row and they're one of the few teams that's done that. But that would be my prediction.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, I'm a Steelers fan, but you can't ever root against Tom Brady. He seems to somehow find a way to get there, and when he gets there, he finds a way to get it done. So I don't know, man. Maybe the Bucs repeat.
I'm a Bears fan, so I don't see that happening anytime soon. But I think it'd be really cool. What a great story would it be if it's Brady versus Belichick? It's a Bucs-Pats Super Bowl. I think that'd be incredible.
That would be fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, John, listen, thanks a lot for coming on our show. It was great having you as a guest. I think it was a great show. And to our listeners out there, don't forget, rate us, review us, give us feedback, hit that like button, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. So thanks, everybody, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast network.